This was a month for graphic novels and classics that somewhere along the way, and for some reason, I had missed. I did a few other books that don't fall into either of those categories. I did one other book, actually. I only did one other book that wasn't either a graphic novel or a classic. So So I did do 5 graphic novels this past month. I get on a kick every once in a while. First of all, let me just say, I love graphic novels, period. That's the end of the sentence. Starting a new sentence. But I don't read them all the time. I usually get in these kicks where one month I'll read none, and the next month I'll read 1,000. This is that month. Not 1,000, 5. I read 5 of them this month. They are shorter than traditional novels, right? But I tend not to count individual issues, comic issues, as books read. I count graphic novels, which a lot of the times are collections of like anywhere from, 5 to 10 individual comics. And so we still got 300, sometimes 400 pages that we're working with in the graphic novels that I read, but still shorter than traditional novels. Here's the first one that I read. It's White Sands Volume 3 by Brandon Sanderson. I honestly don't want to talk about this. I feel like I've already talked about it too much on this channel. I've actually mentioned it way too many times. It's probably been in my TBR for 2 or 3, maybe even 4 months. Sometimes I didn't even mention it. I finally finished it this past month. It took me so long to read this graphic novel because it is absolute garbage. You know how much I love Sanderson, so it's not even that, but it shouldn't have been put out in this format. It shouldn't have been put out in this form. It shouldn't have been put out, period, point blank. I'm not even going to really go into the story because the story is bad, the dialogue's bad, the artwork's bad. I think in Volume 2, the artist shifted from a really bad really bad illustrations to less bad but still bad illustrations. I don't know about the artist. Maybe they have other great things, and I don't even want to say their names here, but the illustrations did not work for me. The dialogue did not work for me. The world building, I cared nothing about. The characters, there was nothing that smelled like or looked like or sounded like Sanderson here, and I'm just so thankful that I'm done with this series. It's in the greater Cosmere that is the Sanderson creation, so I had to do it, but I will never come back to White Sands. Worst part of the Cosmere, worst thing that Sanderson has done, hands down, and I love him. Sanderson is still a god. And then we've got the graphic novel Marvels by Kurt Busiek. And this is what graphic novels should be. This was a work of art, and I mean that in the literal and figurative sense. This is so good, masterpiece if I haven't already said it. We get here an incredibly fresh perspective on a somewhat stale genre, if we're to be honest. Superheroes, I love them. A lot of us love them, but they are overdone right now. But it's okay. There's bad, there's medium, and there's good. And this is among the great. It's a story that most of these comics don't tell because our central figure, our POV character, is not a hero at all. Sorry, he is a hero. He's not a superhero. He's just a regular human. His name is Phil Sheldon, and he's a photojournalist, and we follow him from the 1940s all the way up until like mid-1970s, something along those lines, as superheroes start to be revealed in the world. And so it's a really cool retelling of the origins of Marvel superheroes, all in New York City, told through the eyes of this young and aging photojournalist. The art is great, the characters, how he comes across some of these superheroes, because I don't even know if he has much of a conversation at all with any of the superheroes. It's more just kind of secondhand as he's catching some of the action. But the thing that I love the most, I actually found out at the end of my reading, was that all of the scenes that Phil is showing up at and that are catastrophic to the city, or man, where are the Avengers? They've been missing. They've been on like an intergalactic situation or story. All of those that are told in this story are from the actual comics that came out decades ago. At the end of the Marvels graphic novel, you can see where all of the stories and characters that Phil is seeing and recording and writing about, you can see the comics and the issues that they that those stories were actually told in. And so we're getting this really unique perspective, and then there's a greater narrative going on. Like, it's not just, hey, superheroes are cool. It's like, what is the price that's being paid for these powers, and what does it do to humanity? Really, it was turning the camera away from the superheroes back on the regular normies and saying, who are we, and what is our place in this? It's an incredible, incredible graphic novel series. I would encourage anyone, especially if you're a superhero fan, to go and read this. Next up, we've got the graphic novel adaptation of Kindred. It was originally by Octavia E. Butler, and it was adapted by Damian Duffy. Where Marvel's was just kind of like exciting and yes and amazing, Kindred is gut-wrenching, tragic, painful, and still an amazing story. We follow the story of Dana. She's a young black woman married to a white man, and she lives in like 1970s California. Well, it's kind of a sci-fi story, and she is transported back to pre-Civil War South, where slavery is still very much a thing. And she comes into contact with slavers and stays on a plantation. And the cool thing here is that she doesn't just stay there and have to find a way out, or just stay there and then, stay there, die there, or thrive there. She comes back and forth from time to time. And anytime that she's over in the pre-Civil War South, it's sometimes weeks or months, while here in the present, it's only minutes or hours, maybe a day at the most. It is an incredibly gripping tale. Again, it's painful. It's one that will stick with me for a long time. I have not read the novel of which it was adapted from by Octavia E. Butler, but I know that she's a beast, and so it's definitely one that I want to read. But if you're hesitant to go into that because novels tend to be a lot longer and you don't know if you would like that kind of content, then start with this graphic novel. Again, it's brutal and it doesn't pull any punches, and I think it's all the better for it. It's a really, really good graphic novel. The next graphic novel that I read is A Thief Among the Trees by Queen Saba Tahir. I love her. I love the Ember and the Ashes series. I love her prose. I love everything that she's done. In fact, I've already done a review video of this graphic novel. You can click on that annotation and see that. But I was able to actually get my hands on this a few days before it released, read it in, man, just like an hour going through it. And it's just a perfect prequel story. Was it necessary? No. This story doesn't have to be told, but I'm glad that it was. The artwork is good. I had a few, it's not the best, most beautiful, jaw-dropping display that I've seen in some graphic novels, but it is quality and it's not distracting. The dialogue is really good. Sometimes, in graphic novels, sometimes the dialogue is a lot or the dialogue is like stuffy because they don't have a typical paragraph to be able to tell the story with, and so it's just done. That's not here. It works. It flows. It's really, really good. And then the story, that's where Saba always reigns supreme, and she does so here. Again, it's a prequel story of Elias and Helene, and there's a few other characters in there that and then one or two that you don't, but quickly fall in love with. And it's telling of their time, I think, as they were fivers at Blackcliff Academy. If you know the story, all of that makes sense. If you don't, you're like, what? It's a story as these fivers are on a mission to an island to retrieve a poison. That's all that it is, really. But there's some cool interaction, and it shows a lot of the beginnings of Elias starting to doubt the Empire, and it gives us a little bit more of Helene and Elias's relationship. There is nothing about Laia in there, which she's bae, but that's for future stories. The final book in the Ember and the Ashes series comes out at the end of this year. So if you haven't read this series yet, don't start here with the prequel graphic novel. Start with the first book. You can come back to this after the first book. Read the series. Do yourself a favor. Last graphic novel from this past month, I promise you, that's a lot of graphic novels. What has this channel turned into? It is The Old Guard. It's book one of The Old Guard called Opening Fire by Greg Rucka. And it's fun. I haven't seen the movie, is it? Or television series? I think it's a movie that came out maybe straight to Hulu, Amazon, Netflix, one of those things. And people have been raving about it, saying that it's really good action. It's probably not the best storytelling. I think it's Charlize Theron, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And here in this graphic novel, which I believe is what the movie is based off of, It's great. It's a cool retelling of the whole like we're immortal, we can't die trope. Except these immortals can and will die at some point. I don't know how or when, but it's this elite group of mercenaries from different points in history. The lead character, she's from like 6,000 something years ago. The youngest of them is from like 150 years ago, something like that. But they're all like warriors in their time, and then they've lived all this time, and now they're working together against evil corporations and organizations, and it's a lot of fun. There's not much depth here, but the artwork is perfect for what the story is telling, and then the characters, the battles, it's gruesome. It is for mature audiences, but it's been a lot of fun. Okay, that was all the graphic novels, I promise. Now we're moving on to the single book that didn't fall into classics or graphic novels. This is the third book in the Sinlin Ascends series. No, the Tower of Babel series. The Tower series? The Books of Babel series by Josiah Bancroft. This is the Hod King, and it is so good. It is the best entry in the series thus far, and that is saying a lot. Now, I will always like the first book in a series most, or for obvious reasons. It's the first introduction to all of the magic and characters and beauty. But this third book perfects a lot of that and gives us the characters at their best. Now, this book is different than the other two. We don't just have one POV. We have, I think, 3 points of views throughout this story, and it's kind of following one character's story. For example, Thomas Sinlin, the main character's story, until it gets to like this climax, and then it shifts over to another character in Thomas Sinlin's crew, and it follows their trajectory until a climax, and then it moves over to the third point of view, and then it comes back to all of them to see how those all resolve. It's a really cool way of doing storytelling, and I think Bancroft did amazing with that here. Now, the thing that I liked the most about the first book, Sinlin Ascends, is the mystery of the tower and the beauties and the intricacies and the terribleness of the terror of each of the ringdoms or the levels of the tower. You didn't get that as much in book 2, and you don't get that as much in book 3. That is not the focus. We have turned very character-centric, character-specific, and it makes sense that Bancroft went here. I don't think it's from out of the blue. He's kind of been aiming this way from book 1 because the characters have played such a pivotal role in all of it, and they continue to. We come back into contact with characters from books 2 and book 1. Some of them were enemies and now they're friends. Some were enemies and some of them were enemies and now they're friends, and some were friends and now they're enemies. It's just a great story. I've already said 1,000 times now that this series is an indie treasure. I cannot wait for the 4th and final book that comes out shortly. Man, Josiah Bancroft, incredible author, incredible storyteller, ready to conclude this series in an epic way. All right, we're into some of the classics. Let me explain first why I did this. There was a list that was put out just a couple weeks ago by Goodreads, top 100 sci-fi books on Goodreads. And I don't know how they picked these, but I went through the top like 20 or 30, and I had read most of them. But there were a handful that I hadn't read within the top 5. And so I was like, listen, I need to read those books. I know all the titles. I just never got around to it. So I'm going to read them. These next 3 books were in that list, although they're not fully sci-fi. The first one is Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange. Most people know this because of the Stanley Kubrick film. I did a review. You can click on the annotation and watch that if you'd like. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Is it sci-fi? Man, there's some sci-fi elements, but it's not a sci-fi book. It's just a classic fiction story of this young boy. I think he's like 16 to 18 years old, and he's in a gang in some kind of like future telling of maybe like London or something like that, and he's in a street gang. And anyways, he gets caught up in really just horrific, not caught up, man, this guy's bad. Him and his gang beat, rape, steal, and murder. And so he finally gets caught and put in prison, and he actually undergoes a therapy to try to rewire his brain. And you've probably all seen the movie and know the story. I hadn't, and so this was all new to me. The story's told using this like Nadsat slang. It's this language, this slang that the author created, and it works. It's confusing at first, and I know it slows a lot of people down to enjoying this, but if you can get past the first few chapters, it became kind of just like second nature to me. It kind of just interpreted itself in my brain, and a lot of the words that he uses, it just makes sense and it sounds right. It feels right. That's what matters most. This is a really good story. It's a brutal story. It's not a fun story. It's a dark story. It's not a story for everyone. But if this sounds like something for you, read it. I really, really enjoyed it. And then I cried because I read Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. And this is another classic. It was rated in sci-fi. It's definitely not. Man, so many emotions here. It tells the story of Charlie Gordon. He's a 32-year-old man with a very low IQ. In fact, according to this book, and this word is a rough one, but he's just mentally challenged, however you want to say that. But at first, he's not struggling. He's living his life and he's loving his life. And he's completely content just working, I think, at a bakery. He undergoes a test. Different than the one from the previous book, A Clockwork Orange, Charlie undergoes a test and some therapy and some surgery to increase his IQ. And it does, slowly but surely, as he's kind of entering his logs, his daily logs. That's how we're getting most of this narrative. You see that his IQ grows from 68, I believe is what it starts at, to doubling, to maybe even tripling. He becomes an absolute genius. And it's the story of that rise and fall. But it is absolutely a punch to the gut. I felt so much while reading Charlie's reports. My emotions span the entire gamut during that reading. I was, sad, angry, happy, elated, excited, hopeful, crushed, all of those feelings and more. This is a book of bringing out feelings from its readers. And then finally, it's Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Is that how you say his name? There's no introduction. You've seen the movie. You know the story. It's about dinosaurs. If I wish that I could have read this without knowing what the story was, because the movie is very faithful to the book, obvious changes, but very faithful in the story that it's telling. And the book did such a good job at building the suspense. Really, things don't start to go bad until about halfway through the book, but you get signs and senses that things are not working right. Like, you get the idea from the very beginning that there's someone on the island that's a part of the staff that is trying to steal some eggs. You don't know who it is, but you don't know that things are going to get far worse than that, and that's the least of the problems. Here's the thing, though. As the dinosaurs started to roam, that's when my interest kind of took a nosedive. I know that's odd. That's usually when it should peak, but I was actually much more invested in the story in the first half, leading up to those events than after. You're just following a few different of groups of people and at different places in the park, and so it was kind of hard to track, and it's hard to follow what was going on with each set of characters, and the cast of characters here in the book is a lot. And so it's hard to keep up with all of them. And I will just say, what's Tim's little sister name? Here in the book, it's a younger sister. I think in the movie, she's an older sister. Here in the Lex is the worst. Lex is the worst. I wish she would have been eaten by a dinosaur page 1. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened. So still, Jurassic Park, classic, literary classic. It was on the sci-fi list. Yep, it's a sci-fi book. It is. It's a sci-fi book. I'll give it that. It's not in space, and there's very little machines, but we've got dinosaurs that are alive again. So it's fun, but also you can just watch the movie. Those are all the books that I read in the month of July, and that was a lot. However, a lot of them graphic novels. Do they count? Let me know in the comments. Do they count? Do you count graphic novels as books that you read in a year? Do you count comics, just individual issues, or graphic novels as a whole, or none at all? Let's talk about it in the comments down below. Thank you for watching this video, for clicking like, and if you haven't yet, click subscribe and join the Dragon Army, and we'll see you in the next video.